I've mentioned before that as much as I'm known for LEGO Island, it's not actually a game I play much, if at all. It's nostalgic for sure, and I greatly admire its development story, enough to make a whole documentary about it, but beyond that, it's a kid's game with fairly simplistic gameplay, so adult me has much more fun hacking it than playing it. However, in doing so, I've ended up missing out on a lot of fascinating technical details about the game that you can only really find by playing it over and over, and no one plays games over and over like speedrunners do. While somewhat small and niche, LEGO Island does have a dedicated speedrunning community that has ramped up considerably in the past year, and they've managed to discover things about the game that even I've never seen before. Today, we'll be covering those recent discoveries and how they helped the community smash through a world record that's held firm for over 8 years. All that after a message from our sponsor.
If you're in need of a website and don't want to mess around with writing code or having to set up and maintain a server, then Squarespace is one of the easiest ways to do it. They have over 100 templates to choose from, whether you need a website for an online store, portfolio, business, or blog. Squarespace has you covered and will get you up and running in no time. And if you need to make any customizations, their site editor is a breeze to use, so you can really give your website the personal touch it needs. I used Squarespace for my online store and loved just how easy it was to get a great looking result. It integrated immediately with everything that I needed it to, and it gave me peace of mind to know that my store was in good hands. So if you want a great looking website with no fuss, head over to squarespace.com/MattKCBytes to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. But now back to LEGO Island!
The first speedruns of LEGO Island were published in late 2015, 18 years after the game's release. At first, there were no frills, it was just play through the game as fast as you can. The idea of playing LEGO Island to completion is kind of nebulous, since by design it's an open-ended sandbox game. But you have to draw the line somewhere, so the community created 2 categories, Pepper% and 100%. Pepper% is basically LEGO Island's any percent. You complete each available mission as the de facto protagonist Pepper, including the main campaign where you recapture the Brickster after accidentally freeing him. As of this video, Pepper% runs tend to hover around 10 to 20 minutes or so. 100% is completing every available mission as every character. There's a lot of repetition involved in this, but it does exhaust pretty much everything you can do in the game. This category tends to be more like 30 minutes to an hour. By 2016, Dutch speedrunner Don Fortune had claimed the world record in both categories, records that would prove unbeatable for the next 8 years.
Holy shit.
It's not that people didn't try, it's just that LEGO Island is not only niche, but is also, at the best of times, a somewhat punishing speed game. It has some pretty notorious glitches, and often you think of glitches being beneficial to speedruns, but not these ones. LEGO Island's glitches only serve to frustrate and demoralize speedrunners. The biggest issue is the infamous turn speed bug. For those who don't know, the developers more or less forgot to unhook the player turn speed from the frame rate, and on the hardware of the time, the game only ran about 10 FPS at most, so that's what the turn speed is calibrated for. But with today's technology, the game can run exponentially faster, which inadvertently makes it almost impossible to precisely maneuver around the island. Sure, if you practice enough, you can probably become a master of anything, but there's no denying this makes the game pretty miserable to play even casually, let alone for a speedrun. You may be aware that I've written a patch for LEGO Island's turn speed in my modding tool LEGO Island Rebuilder, one that does unhook it from the frame rate so it's no longer an issue, and the speedrunners did seriously consider whether that patch should be allowed in runs or not. But they ultimately concluded that using unofficial modifications to make the game easier wasn't really in the true spirit of speedrunning. They do, however, allow external means of capping the game's frame rate to make the turn speed closer to what the developers intended, since doing that doesn't technically alter the game's operation. Fellow LEGO Island modder Ramen2x even made a speedrunning approved version of Rebuilder that removes all settings except for the frame rate limiter. But even so, the speedrunners kept looking for solutions to the turn speed that might be more ideal, and soon enough, they found one. Most people I know who play LEGO Island use the arrow keys on the keyboard. Even Don Fortune's world record runs use them, and you can see how much he struggled with them. However, it's now common knowledge that for the developers, keyboard control was kind of an afterthought. In behind-the-scenes footage, they can be seen almost always using the game's mouse controls, and in early leaked builds, there was no keyboard control at all, which is probably why the turn speed issue was able to fly under the radar in the first place. With the mouse controls, you basically click and drag around as if the screen was one giant joystick. It does provide more precise analog control over your movement, but it's also pretty awkward to use, especially by today's standards. But speaking of joysticks, the game has a third control scheme that I had honestly overlooked until now. In LEGO Island's config window, there's a checkbox for Use Joystick. Now, joysticks back in the 90s were these huge, hulking dildos that attached to the computer through a now obsolete game port, and I always assumed that LEGO Island would only work with those. And while it probably was designed with those in mind, it turns out the game just utilizes Microsoft's direct input APIs, and speedrunner Rin discovered that thanks to Microsoft's legendary backwards compatibility, a modern controller, even from decades later like an Xbox One controller, will still get detected as valid joystick and work in the game automatically. To tell you the truth, I'm stunned. With proper analog controls, the whole game becomes much more manageable. Unlike the keyboard, which is just full speed left or right, the stick lets you tilt much more gradually. Meanwhile, the joystick controls also make it easier to run. Yeah, did you know LEGO Island has a run button? As far as I know, it isn't documented anywhere, but if you hold the control key, you will go slightly faster. Obviously, for a speedrun, you want to go faster, but it's a little awkward to use the arrow keys, control key, and have to click on things every now and then. But on joystick, you can run just by pushing the thumbstick up all the way. So just by using the joystick, you get both easier turning and faster movement, both of which are naturally a huge help for speedrunning. The joystick controls have a unique mechanic that lets you quickly look left, right, and behind you without changing the direction you're going. This may sound like a gimmick, but it's actually pretty useful for checking around for things you might have missed without having to slow your pace down at all. The joystick discovery was the breakthrough that LEGO Island speedrunning needed. It saved it from years of dormancy. Arguably, it's the best way to play LEGO Island, period, even though it probably isn't the most nostalgic depending on how you played it as a kid. While the speedrunners don't mandate any particular control scheme, all top players are using joystick because it just makes more sense. But they didn't stop there. There are a lot more optimizations that the community could utilize to make their runs even faster. Another thing that makes LEGO Island a surprisingly brutal speed game is the amount of RNG. There's this one section of the game where the Brickster is dropping bricks out of the back of a stolen ambulance. It's a fairly significant stage in the campaign. You have to follow him all around the island until he's dropped 5 bricks, and then follow him back to a predetermined endpoint. When and where he drops the bricks and how far he meanders away from the endpoint are effectively random, and as such, this section alone can lose you minutes of precious time. That being said, the community did discover that you can somewhat manipulate his AI so he drops bricks faster than he's supposed to. From what they've observed, when the Brickster is ready to drop a brick, he'll slow down to let the player catch up. Once you're within a certain radius, he'll drop the brick and speed away, at which point you have to keep following him around until he randomly decides to enter that dropping state again. But if you see him enter that state and wait until just before he's about to turn a corner to enter his radius, he'll drop the brick but won't be able to speed away nearly as effectively. If you time it right, you can get within the radius again so he drops a second brick, effectively skipping a whole cycle of the stage. The community has dubbed this phenomenon the double drop. It's difficult to pull off, but is pretty consistent if you can. Once again, it helps to have analog controls here so you can more precisely control your movement speed. Now you might be thinking, wait, didn't you guys decompile the whole game? Can't you see what's doing this or what else might help speed this section up? Well, yes, but also no. It's complicated. While we have collectively gone through the process of hand translating x86 assembly back to C++ as accurately as we can, paradoxically, that doesn't actually mean we have a full understanding of all of the code yet. It's kind of unintuitive, but to decompile a function, we don't actually have to know what it's doing. We just need to know that it compiles to the same machine code as the original game. There's a lot of code in the decomp that's still undocumented or has placeholder names because we simply don't know enough about what it does to label it properly yet. The path code is particularly complex, and while our understanding of it is constantly improving, it may still be a while before we have any definitive answers to questions like this. There are other challenges to running LEGO Island that trip up even top-level players to this day. For example, the game is also known to crash if you skip cutscenes too quickly.
There's lost 15 to that. And the game crashed!
Yeah, in the situation where the whole goal is going as fast as possible, the game can actually penalize you for going too fast. You could be on an insane world record pace and then lose it all just because you pressed the spacebar a few frames too early. There are no known solutions to this, but realistically, every speedrun has its challenges and things you have to learn to work around. Another optimization the community found was that it's actually possible to completely skip one of the sections of the campaign. After you retrieve all of the dropped bricks from the Brickster, the game brings you to a build section where you use the bricks to reconstruct the island's helicopter. However, if you click the quit button to return to the island, the campaign will actually just proceed as if you did finish the helicopter. It's unknown whether this was intentional or an oversight, but knowing what we know about the game and its inner workings, it seems most likely it was an oversight. I mean, instinctively you see the screen and you rebuild the helicopter, so it's quite likely that just no one encountered it in testing. With all of these discoveries, speedrunner Undere was finally able to overtake Don Fortune's run in 2024, and today has managed to save a whopping 3 minutes over that old world record. Yet the community is still looking for more ways they can optimize future runs.
If you follow speedrunning, you'll know that oftentimes the fastest version of a game is the Japanese version.
This can be for a number of reasons, but is usually either because the Japanese version was the first and therefore buggiest, or because Japanese text takes up less space so it's faster to scroll through. A similar principle applies to Lego Island, except it's the Danish version that's the fastest. That gets tracks because Lego is a Danish company, but the reason why is because the dialogue is indeed shorter. While most of the dialogue in the game is skippable, some of it isn't, the worst offender being,
Ladies and gentlemen, start your engines please, and go!
In the Danish version, this line is a couple of seconds shorter.
Start jeres motorer nu og kør!
A couple of seconds may not sound like much, but when the runs are down to only 10 minutes, you've got to take whatever you can get. A weird quirk of the game is that when you play in hardware rendering mode, the build sections have an uncapped frame rate, leading to animations that are way faster than the developers intended. In many ways, this would actually be great for speedrunning, except for the fact that Lego Island's hardware mode is a broken mess on modern versions of Windows. Software rendering is much better, but strangely, it has a second frame limiter just for those sections that limits them to 30 FPS. While having faster build sections is very enticing, most runners consider hardware mode too much of a headache to run regularly. But runs submitted in hardware mode won't be rejected if you choose to use it. There are also a lot of bugs that the community has found over the years that seem like they could be useful for speedruns, but haven't ended up being so far. One fascinating thing that a lot of Lego Island runners found was a phenomenon they called launches. This can be easily triggered when you drive back into the hospital at top speed with the ambulance, but launches can happen in other areas too. When the player is removed from the ambulance, their momentum is actually preserved, and it completely displaces your character and launches you out of bounds. This sounds really useful, but unfortunately it isn't. Lego Island is pretty strict about keeping you on its predetermined paths, and if you leave one segment, it'll generally just snap you to the next one. So right now, this is just used as a very minor speed boost to the next part of the run, but hey, maybe in the future someone will find a better use for it. Speaking of out of bounds, there's another way you can temporarily slip out of bounds by hugging the wall in just the right way on a sloped surface. This was a discovery shared by a member of Ondere's chat who only showed up for an hour, never appeared again, and no one can remember their name. But if you're out there, this is pretty cool. Sadly, it too doesn't have much practical use in a speedrun for the same reason, but once again, maybe someone will find a use for it in the future. Finally, one last bug that seems helpful but hasn't been so far is one we found a few years ago. Essentially, there's a way to set a flag to skip the opening countdown to a race. Undoubtedly, this would save at least a few seconds, but unfortunately the setup alone ends up taking more time than it saves, so it ends up not helping. It is pretty funny to do though nonetheless. The speedrunning community remains incredibly niche, but right now it's better than ever. The dedication is really impressive. Lego Island even has an auto-splitter, which commonly only happens for games with much bigger followings. I expect only more fascinating discoveries to be made as time goes on. I'd bet there's some truly useful game-breaking stuff still yet to be discovered. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you all in the next one. Bye guys.